first Vice President and now Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris had one of the biggest political career of her life. She delivered a keynote address on the fourth and the final day of the DNC. And to talk more on Harris's speech and the major takeaways from that, we're now being joined by Greg Swenson, Chairman, Republicans Overseas, and he's joining us live from London. Thank you so much for joining us on WION, Mr. Swenson.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I want to first start by asking you that what were some of the big takeaways from Kamala Harris's speech at the DNC? She, of course, touched upon various topics from reproductive rights, security, border issues, and immigration. Do you perhaps think that she resonated with the American voters, and will they see her as a 47th U.S. president?
Look, I think she resonated with her base and the Democrat Party who's already behind her. So, you know, in many respects, that's the way these conventions have gone. They become basically, you know, opportunities to reach out and unify the respective parties. So in that sense, she did a great job. Her speech, you know, she is a good speech giver. She did brush on some of those topics that you mentioned, but didn't really address the issues and didn't really have much discussion about her plans, you know, her agenda, her policies. And so I think it wasn't just what she said, it's more what she didn't say or did not say. You know, again, it rallied the base. She was full of platitudes. She loves to talk about hope and joy. And I think she was very upbeat and spirited in her delivery. But we've heard in the 4 weeks that she's been the nominee since they pushed President Biden to the side of the road, they haven't really talked about policies and especially haven't talked about their record, because I think if they did, they would lose. And so I think her speech was well done and presented well, but I think it probably didn't do much more than rally the base.
Right, Mr. Swenson. Now, immigration and economy, there are two topics which every American is extremely concerned about. Harris, however, gave a lot of time of a speech, and that's also how she started the finale speech, underlining her roots and her upbringing, where she talks about how her mother taught her to fight against injustice. How do you think that panned out, and how will that affect the voters in America?
Yeah, again, I think it does have an appeal to her base, right? The Democrat Party has become the party of identity politics. All they really care about is that, and DEI and all the other sort of trendy luxury boutique issues. Whereas the rest of the country cares about, you know, their pocketbooks, they care about their children, they care about illegal migrants taking over their cities and towns. And I don't think she didn't address the issues in terms of what to do about them. She just talked in platitudes and about her upbringing, and that's all nice. And I don't you know, disrespect her for that. But surely, if she talked about the actual issue and how it got this way, she would be losing voters, because this is on her watch, right? She was the border czar. President Biden purposely opened the border and allowed 10 million illegal migrants in. It's a humanitarian crisis. More people are dying from fentanyl poisoning than, you know, every year than died in Vietnam in the 10-year war that the U.S. had in Vietnam. So if you look at the way that Biden and Harris have handled the border, that is a loser from an electoral perspective. And I think you'll see that in November. As long as President Trump and the campaign can define President or Vice President Harris as part of the Biden-Harris administration that was basically oversaw the transfer of our immigration to the human trafficking and drug cartels in Mexico.
You speak of how Harris did not cover major policies, and it was a good speech, but it did not cover the issues that Americans are worried about. Do you think Trump was able to do that during his RNC? And if you can perhaps draw a comparison between Trump's speech and that of Harris?
Yeah, I think both were probably too long. I think that President Trump addressed those issues. I think he was trying to make it a referendum between his administration from 2017 to 21 versus the Biden-Harris administration. On that metric, he would win, right? Because the people were much better off 4 years ago. If you ask that question, are you better or worse off than you were 4 years ago? Trump wins. I think he did that well at the RNC. I think he talked about, making America great again. I know that's his campaign slogan, but there's a lot of understanding by the voters that they were better off 4 years ago. They trust President Trump on the economy, on inflation, on the border crisis significantly more than they trusted Biden, and still significantly more than they trust Kamal Harris. He polls between 10 and 15 points higher than Harris on those issues, although she's polling overall better than Trump, again, because she's done a good job, projecting this sort of, optimism. And I think there's room for that. I think there's room for optimism in both parties. But the problem is she's ignoring her track record, which is horrible, and she's ignoring the agenda, which when demonstrated by either by her occasional reference to her agenda, like her economic policies a week ago today, when she discussed those at a rally, or when you have Bernie Sanders talking about their agenda, this week at the DNC.
Okay.
That's a progressive left socialist agenda. So I think she's doing a great job of avoiding her record and avoiding her agenda. As long as she could keep doing that, she has a great chance of winning. So it's up to the Republicans and President Trump to discuss those issues. 87% of Americans think the border is a crisis. 71% think it's the fault of Biden and Harris. So on that issue alone, I think Trump could do very well, or will do very well. And then, of course, on inflation and the economy, Biden and Harris caused the inflation with the reckless spending, with the hostility to the energy sector. And so, you've got 20% higher prices. Food is up 22%, rent up 22%, electricity up 30%. Gas or petrol is up 50% since Biden and Harris took over. Heating fuel is up 50%, electricity is up 32%. So, these are things that have to be attached to Kamala Harris. As long as President Trump can do that, I think he'll do well.
So according to you, Mr. Swenson, the point of economy, that wasn't very well covered by Kamala. But during Kamala's live speech in Chicago during the DNC, Trump had taken to his Truth Social media platform, and he started bashing Kamala Harris while his speech was going on. Do you think at this point of time Trump is worried from Harris's presidency, and perhaps because in the past also he has clearly said that it would be easier to defeat Harris than Biden?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think we've all been surprised about how well she's polling, because you're absolutely right. Prior to pushing Biden aside, she was polling lower than Biden. So the common thought, the traditional assumption was that they would not put Harris in that position. The reason they kept Biden as long as they did and waited until late July to push him aside is because they had no confidence in Kamala Harris. But it got to the point where Biden was so bad, they felt like they had to do it. She was the least popular vice president of all time, or since polling started on vice president. So I can understand they were fearful, and that's why, again, why they kept Biden as long as they did. But they've really surprised us with the fact that they've transformed her, they've re-imaged her, they've repackaged her. So she's gone from the least popular vice president of all time to a virtual tie with Trump in the polls. It's amazing how they've done it. I don't know that it can last, because she's done no press conferences, no interviews, and again, no discussion of her record or an agenda. I think when that starts, people will start to understand that President Trump is a better option for people who care about the border, who care about inflation and the economy and the top issues. Basically, he wins again. He wins on the issues.
Right. I also want to seek your assessment on how during the 4-day DNC there was a lot of pomp, and we had seen the Clintons, the Obamas, and Oprah Winfrey walking up to the stage and endorsing Harris and saying that she can. In your assessment, what kind of an impact will this star-studded lineup have on the voters, majorly on the undecided voters?
Yeah, I don't think it will have much of an effect on undecideds. It's definitely designed to make to rally the base, to make the base and the party excited. To inspire workers and volunteers. And in that case, it worked, right? I think the celebrities have always been part of the Democrat Party. They seem to do that all the time at their fundraisers and their rallies. So, I think the convention was well executed, that's for sure. Will it work with undecideds? I doubt it. They don't really care about celebrities. They care about their pocketbooks. They care about the open border, the drug cartels, the human trafficking. So that's what has not been addressed at the convention. And perhaps that wasn't the right forum for it. But now that it's over, I think you'll start to see more discussion about the record of Kamala Harris and how bad it is, how she campaigned for president in 2020, which was from the extreme progressive left, and of course her agenda or lack thereof of an agenda for the next 4 years. And when she talked about her economic policies last Friday, they were so horrible that even CNN and the Washington Post, which is basically the activist media supporting Democrats in general, but supporting Harris in this case, even they criticized it because it was so left-leaning. So
Right.
I think we'll see more opportunities to define make clear the differences between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
Right. But Mr. Swenson, on the reproductive rights, the Republicans and Trump's stance has not been as strong as that of Democrats. You do speak of how the Republicans have showcased the policies very well during the campaign trail and also at the RNC. But how do you assess the issue of reproductive rights, which has now become also one of the essential issues that concerns every American?
Yeah, so 2 or 3 points here. One is they're trying to make it an issue of concern and make it a top issue, although right now it's not. It ranks number 7 in terms of issues and ranked by importance to American voters. Only 7% of Americans think that it's the top issue. And even in a swing state like Michigan, only 6% of women in Michigan are consider it the only issue or the top issue. So I'm not sure it's going to be as big a factor, but I'm sure the Democrats will try to make it a big issue. Secondly, right now, the Republican platform on reproductive rights is actually pretty mainstream. It's sort of right down the middle. President Trump on many occasions has talked about, 2 things. One, it should be up to the states, which I think is great. That's democracy. Let the legislatures, let the people decide. And 2, when even the topic of a federal regulation comes up, he says, it should be reasonable. It should be 12 weeks, 16 weeks, something like that. That's kind of mainstream. That polls in the 60s. The majority of Americans think that, abortion in the first trimester should be legal. Okay. Right. So the Republican Party and Trump are pretty mainstream moderate on that. Okay. Now the Democrat platform is taxpayer funded up until birth. Okay. That's not, well into the 3rd trimester, up until birth. That polls at 13. It's kind of sickening that I'm even having this conversation. It polls at 13. It polls at 18 with Democrats. And here in the UK, that policy polls at 16. So you have the great majority of Americans that think the Democratic policy, which again, taxpayer funded up until birth, is really inhumane. And I think that if the Republicans can articulate that, and I'm sure many of your viewers assume Republicans are anti-abortion, Democrats are pro-choice. That's not the case. It's an extreme, progressive, shocking policy that they've advocated, and both Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have advocated that. Tim Walz, as governor, signed into law that takes away the protections for babies that were born in the 3rd trimester through botched abortions. It's gross, and I think if we can articulate that, we'll do much better.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Swenson, for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Thanks a lot.